part of it.
Hey, sorry?
A lot of the time changes. It's hard. I think if I hadn't had talked to you yesterday, I probably would have missed this one.
I mean, this one's always stayed. Well, I guess no, you're right. This one was last week at first. Yeah. Well, this is what we're making today.
Okay.
So pickled mushrooms. Like I said, this was made what was it, a week and a half ago or something with Coralie. We'll be doing the same one. Basically, I'm going to actually be changing up the flavors a little bit. This one had basil and garlic and parsley, basil, and garlic in there. And today, this is our little setup for ingredients. So we got a bit some tarragon, some garlic, red pepper flakes, and peppercorns. And then these are the main ingredients. So no matter what, we need salt, as well as sugar, olive oil, and apple cider vinegar, and of course our jar here. You can use any size jar, of course, depending on how many mushrooms you have. The important thing to note is that the mushrooms need to be submerged in the liquid when once all is said and done. So obviously mushrooms shrink a little bit when they go into the heat. So if you look at the amount of mushrooms you have, consider that that's going to shrink probably by 20%, and then kind of take into account how much that's going to fill up a jar, and then how much liquid you might need for that. So it's all kind of a guesstimation. Of course, if you have too much liquid, you can always throw it out. And if you have too little liquid, then you can always make more. So it's not the end of the world either way. So I actually have a little video that I wanted to play. This is recorded yesterday. I'm going to share my screen here. What does it say? I will try that. All right. Can you see this video all right?
Yeah.
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 Hey guys, so this is my oyster mushrooms. These were fruited in stage 3 along with you guys. But of course, everyone's at a different stage.
Can you hear it all right?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Okay.
Stage in their growing process. So this is currently where my oysters are. Now I was saving this. I was hoping that I would be able to harvest these tomorrow, Sunday, during stage 4, because that's part of the harvest session. But of course, you know, you can't manage everything. And these are not only ready to go, they were ready to go yesterday. And I said, you know, I really hope I can just hold on to these until Sunday morning and then harvest it with the class. But alas, these are starting to dry up on me. They're gonna be garbage by tomorrow morning. So I have no choice but to harvest them. You probably can't see it too well. Maybe if I shine a bit of light on them. But so let's see, the bottom ones, they look very white. And you can see the ones all the way in the back there that they're starting to brown. They don't look as white. And that's simply because basically all of them are starting to really dry out. Only the ones at the very bottom, only these aren't super dried out yet. Some of the ones at the very top are literally, you can hear them, you can feel them, very crunchy, not good. So I'm already going to be losing some specimens simply because I waited until today. And this goes to show why you really need to harvest them when they're ready to go. You don't need to cook them right away, but you do need to harvest them when they're ready to go. So I can't wait any longer, so I'm just going to harvest it now, record it, and then I can play this back to you tomorrow morning. So there's 2 ways of harvesting. So one is basically to just grab your knife and cut off right where it attaches to the actual substrate. The other one is to just peel it off. Generally speaking, the peel off is what you would use if you were planning to harvest on the other side. And if you're not planning to harvest on the other side, if you don't expect any other flushes, then you could just cut it off. And that way you don't have to deal with any substrate mess or anything like that. When you peel it off, you might get a bit of substrate with the cluster at the foot of the cluster. And so that's a little bit annoying to deal with, but Doesn't mean you can't peel it off and then slice it off. The reason why you wouldn't cut it is simply because whatever remnants you leave on the bag, basically it's going to stop sending any energy towards that area, and that area is going to kind of shut down, but it's going to start decomposing. You're going to get possibly a mold. So if you were trying to fruit on the other side of it, but on this side you cut it off, and now you have mold growing on that side, then this side's not going to do too well. So you basically just want to peel it off so that that's said and done, and then it's only the mycelium. You can do a quick tape on that side to cover the hole, allow it to kind of conserve some of that moisture level, and then keep going. You're not taping it for any contamination risk, because if you peel it off, all you have in there is mycelium and the substrate, and it's well enough ahead that it's not going to get contaminated. But you do want to kind of close it up just so that you can retain some extra moisture. So in this case, I actually cut a second hole at the same time I did this, and nothing has fruited yet. It sends clearly a lot of energy to this cluster. This was an original cluster. It was already kind of pinning when I cut it. And so it kind of exploded once I cut it. But the other side is actually kind of dried out. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add some moisture into this block, and I'm going to peel off this section, and then hopefully I can get a little bit more, a second flush coming out of here, but we'll see, because that first flush is pretty massive, so anyways, so this is how, basically, if you're going to cut it off, right, or just take your knife, you'd find right where it connects to the substrate, and you would just kind of saw it off. You might want to hold the mushrooms because it's probably going to fall off, but that's all you did. It's pretty simple, obviously. If you're going to peel it, what you want to do is kind of grab onto the base of it, or its side and base. It doesn't really matter where you carry it, honestly, because you're just going to peel it from the substrate. And you want to try your best to not take too much of the substrate with the cluster, but really it's going to do what it wants to do. Your job is just to gently peel it off. So in this case, I'm looking around where it's connected to the block, so I can find the most optimal way of getting my hand in there. I think it's actually from the top for me. Up here you can see that this is the top of the cluster, and basically connecting the substrate just right there. And all of these are basically dead and dying anyways. So in order to preserve the integrity of all the bottom ones, because otherwise I have to kind of go in through the bottom and I might damage some of them. So I'm going to go in from the top, and I'm just going to peel downwards basically. So here we go. Put my hand right into the right where that cluster is, and gently there we go. A little bit of wiggle. There we go. A little bit of wiggle. All right, there we go. So there's the substrate. You could barely tell where it even came off. And there's the cluster in one go. And you'll see, so there's the bottom of it. There's the top. Try handling it very carefully at this point. So there's, you can see obviously some of the substrate that's there. So now you know kind of when you're peeling it off, obviously, like I said, it's going to pull some of that substrate. It's a little difficult to kind of not get some substrate with that. So basically at this point, I'm just going to grab my knife and just basically cut off these little areas here. And this can just be done later. Once you start cutting it up, all these oysters or all these different mushrooms are going to start basically separating. So if you just want to keep it simple, like today, I don't plan on cooking with this today, so I want to keep it nice and whole. So as a result, I'm not going to be cutting off any substrate, but that's basically what we're looking at. It looks like a little alien in that angle. So that's it. And then tomorrow we're going to pickle these. So it's going to be delightful. All right, that's it, guys. See you tomorrow. Bye.
All right.
Great.
So while that was going on, I pulled out the mushrooms here. I have in my bag, and I went forward with the cutting. So there's the substrate there. You can see a little bit of, the dried mushrooms on there. Maybe it's too bright. White washes. There we go. So you saw probably during the video that the cluster kind of had some pretty dried or small pieces. So kind of as I went, I took my knife, basically, you imagine this was the core there. I basically just cut all around the core and removed it like that. So you can see kind of an angle there that I was cutting it on. So I just cut basically all around it. And this is what I'm left with. So this is basically my good cluster of mushrooms. So you can still see that, they're basically separating there. You can see each individual stem. I'm not sure if it's coming through on the video, but there's basically stem all around. So these are just basically ready to, I'm basically holding them together right now. I can easily just pull them off. There we go. So now that the center is off, it's easy to go. Some of these are the ones that either fell off while I was cutting them, or some of the ones that I kind of picked through. So there might be some dry ones, like these are clearly dried. They folded in on themselves, but they're still very flexible. They're not, dry. So I'm going to keep using those because I'm pickling them. And so they're just going to absorb all that moisture anyway. So there's no point in tossing them. Some of these other ones here, like this, I'm not going to keep that. First off, I'd have to, we're pan frying everything. So something like this, it's basically going to disintegrate or just burn. There's no real point to keeping it. And I have plenty of mushrooms, so why bother? So my little pile here is going to be thrown into the compost, but the rest here is going to be utilized. Probably going to save some of these, the nicer ones, to just kind of do a little meal later for dinner kind of thing. And then these older ones or the drier ones, or the ones that aren't perfect, those are all the ones that I'm going to put into the jar today. So without further ado, any questions on the harvest before we get to the recipe?
No, it was helpful because I think when I harvested mine, I did have a good amount, but then I was trying to reinvigorate that little, I had a good dry chunk, and then because I opened both sides, the second side didn't do as well, and maybe it was too much, I don't know. So what I did was I taped up the two sides, and now I opened up the end, and that's coming along. So, but yeah, I think that one side did well, the other side maybe just didn't get the moisture, and I was trying to move it to a cold room and do various things because I noticed that with temperature that the color would change. And
yeah, no, it can be especially which you're growing blues, right?
Yeah.
Those tend to be actually somewhat what do we call that? Yeah, they're one of the true beginner species, if you will.
Yeah.
So they will fluctuate, obviously, all the mushrooms will, but they tend to be the most
forgiving, maybe.
Forgiving, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's why I think, because I wanted something that was easy to start with. So, yeah. And I think also it was really warm that, like, we went up to 30, and we don't have air conditioning in our house, so it I think it was quite a bit of variation in
and for the mushroom world, that's a massive change, honestly, for everyone, right?
Yeah.
We went from 10 degrees to 30 degrees in
it was crazy
48 hours. So so this is a great recipe if you end up having kind of some mushrooms that aren't ideal, because these are just going to kind of cook them down a little bit and then marinate them. So if you have slightly drier ones or
but I think you're always going to have some of those in the flesh. It seems that some are going to be, because they don't all come at the same time, and so while you're waiting for them to, because the other thing is that I did take, and so I did cut a few off, the good ones off the block, and I think that I remember you saying you shouldn't do it, but then I thought, well, I don't want to take the whole thing because they were still coming, but now I see that you shouldn't take a knife to the block at all, so I only cut a few off, but but you had mentioned not to do that, that you should pull them from, unless you don't want to do anything more with the block.
So if you have a cluster growing and you can harvest the ones that are, at full maturity without, and leave the rest of the cluster that's still young and growing, that's perfectly fine to do. Because in a day or two, you're going to be harvesting the rest of the cluster, right? So there's no real issue with that. The issue with cutting it is to leave that nub there for the next, week while the other side grows,
Okay.
right? Because over a week, that's going to, basically the mycelium's not going to send any energy that way. It's going to shut it off and say, okay, we're done with that. And so that's going to start decomposing on itself and getting moldy. But it's going to take a little bit of time to get there, right? So if you just
I pulled it off, afterwards. Yeah. Okay.
So you should be, that would be perfectly fine. It is also a little different if you're doing cluster versus, individual mushrooms, right? If you're growing like the toadstool mushrooms, like at shiitake, right, where they're all coming up, they all come up at a very different time. So at least a cluster kind of comes together at one big cluster. But when you grow the, mushrooms toadstool style that all come up individually, they really come up at different times. So you have no choice but to really harvest them, as they mature. And, you do risk because those ones, you never really peel them off anyways, because just one mushroom. So you typically cut it. For things like shiitake, it's actually interesting because I've never actually seen the shiitake nub start molding. Even at JCB's yesterday, you could see that he had already harvested a lot of the mushrooms off them, and the leftover nub, if you will, on the block. I don't recall seeing any of those getting moldy, but some of the rest of the block, the actual substrate, was starting to get moldy. But that's also, with shiitake, it's just a unique situation because you take the entire plastic off, so the entire block is now subject to contamination.
I was surprised how much mold he had on the, I guess it was the chestnut. Like he had a lot of mold.
Yeah, I was a little surprised by that too, I'll be honest.
And I think it would be hard to control. Like you're introducing, and it's not healthy for him either to work in that area with all that mold. So
no, I was a little surprised to see that, honestly. And I think that, he did say that it's common with chestnuts because they take so long to grow. And
you'd almost think you need to put them in a separate area and a more controlled area. But
yeah, trichoderma is not really good to have in any way, shape, or fashion. I'd be interested to see how another commercial farm grows their chestnuts and whether they also have that mold issue, because on one hand it's pretty difficult to avoid it. If something is growing exposed, because he said he cuts it, and then once he cuts it, it takes 4 weeks to grow. So it's almost impossible to not have mold when you have a high humidity environment and something full of nutrients, right? And then it sits there for 4 weeks. It's going to get moldy, right? So I don't see a way around it per se. But general rules for growing mushrooms is, I've said it in the workshop, if you start getting that blue-green mold, you're going to toss that block, because it's not healthy to have it around. So a little interesting. I think I'm going to do a little bit more research on the chestnut mushrooms, and I've never grown chestnut.
I wonder if it's worth it then, like it's worth all the trouble, because I don't know if they're very popular, or they're pretty, but I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah. Never tried them, so.
Yeah. I've tried them before, but now I'm concerned by trying them, because if this is commonplace, where they're basically always growing on a block that's contaminated with trichoderma, I don't know if I particularly want to try them anymore. So that's why I'm going to look into it. It's just, it throws me off. It goes against the rule there, but maybe it's an exception to the rule. We'll see.
So how long have you known, and I don't even know the gentleman's name at JCB, what's
John.
his name? John. So how long have you known John? For the 3 years, or?
2.5, basically right after he got going.
Okay.
I reached out to him and when I heard about him, I reached out and we had a conversation about working together in a way. And 2.5 years later, here we are.
Mhm.
We
So were
don't
you
do,
before he was?
sorry?
Were you into mushrooms before he was?
Oh, yeah. No,
Yeah.
he only started 3 years ago into mushrooms.
Yeah.
He only got into it after, he retired from the agricultural industry.
Mhm.
And I think he was retired for a couple of years. And then he was kind of like, okay, I need to do something. I'm bored. And
So then you jump in with both feet and you start
well, that's
singing.
it, exactly. So that's how he got into mushrooms. So he didn't have like any background in mushrooms before, launching basically his business. Which I was very surprised by when I went to meet him 2.5 years ago, because the guy knew very little, and I was like, I don't know how this is going to work for this guy. But seemingly done well. And now, when I go and I speak to him, he knows a lot. So he knows a lot about what he needs to know about, right? Which is the cultivation of his species. But I've spoken with him before about wild mushrooms, and that's not his forte, let's say, but it doesn't need to be, because that's not what he's growing. So a little bit of that.
Okay,
Anyway, all right. Should we get cooking?
sure.
Okay. So over here, I got my setup. Basically, it's either me or the stovetop. So since we're cooking, it's going to be the stovetop. So.
And I'm gonna listen to make a cup of coffee, so.
Okie dokes. So basically what we're going to be doing today. So got a cast iron pan here, but any frying pan will do. This has been on a low heat just while we were talking. So my oil is nice and warm. That's just canola oil. It doesn't matter what kind of oil you use here. I would avoid olive oil in this case, simply because we want a pretty hot sear on these mushrooms, and olive oil does not do well at high temperatures. So we're going to look at a canola oil. We can use grapeseed. Well, grapeseed is canola, just a different name. So grapeseed oil, peanut oil, doesn't matter. Canola is the cheapest. So this is what we got here. This is not going to imbibe any flavor really. So that's why it doesn't really matter what we use. So yeah, avoid olive oil and avoid butter as well. Both of those will burn too quickly. So let's go in. I just cranked up my heat to get a nice hot. Mushrooms are basically sitting there ready to go. Gonna get my bowl here with my mushrooms. So I like to keep them whole. They don't need to be broken up once they go in there. If you like to separate them, you can. But I find that, I don't know, with pickling mushrooms, I honestly prefer to have them completely whole. I think it just adds more something to it, just having larger chunks.
So if you weigh them, if you weigh them beforehand, what's the weight? Because I guess they're gonna shrink when you fry them.
The weight, I honestly don't know the weight. I could find out for you in a second though.
I'm kind of curious, just to get the right quantity.
My scale here. So it's 300 grams. The stuff that's actually going to be usable here is about 300 grams,
Okay, thanks.
just over half a pound. That's coming off of half the block, so could get more. It is nice and hot there. Add my mushroom straight in now. Big chunk here. Rule of thumb with mushrooms is always don't crowd the pan, but in this case, it doesn't matter too much, simply because it's in there for such a short period. So they only need to be in there for about 1 minute, but you want to try to kind of give them a full covering. A little difficult with oyster mushrooms per se because they have so many folds in them, so it's basically impossible to get in there. But do what we can, and then in about a minute. Meanwhile, what I should have gotten going was my marinade in that pot there. Give this a second, do its thing. So for our marinade, it's pretty simple, or marinade, our pickling liquid, pretty simple. It's a quarter cup of sugar, 1 cup of olive oil, good olive oil, and 2 cups of apple cider vinegar. Sugar here. That's a quarter cup. And I have everything because I already did this recipe. So this is a full 2-cup bottle, and this was a 2-cup bottle of olive oil, which is now half full from the last time I made this recipe. So I guess you just empty out the whole bowls. Some of these are definitely ready to go. This one, I would think I'm just going to push it down to give it a better sear. Not searing much. That's basically all we need. We'll take those out. So. All right. So you see some of them, not too much, just a little bit of there's a little brown there. But otherwise it's still a pretty basic white mushroom. Some others are a little bit darker and have a nice sear on them. Ultimately, it doesn't change too much. The goal is just to kind of open up the cells of the mushrooms. Basically, mushrooms have a very unique style of cell that requires heat to open them up. So that's why eating raw mushrooms is not particularly useful, because your body can't break down the nutrients in them because the cells are built in a certain way. So you basically need to have that heat in there to open up the cells. And once those cells are open up, then they can absorb all those all the liquids and stuff like that as well. So that's basically all we were doing there. So we don't need any coloration per se, but we do have a little bit on some of them, and that is perfectly good to go. So what we're going to do with those is we're going to give them a little bit of salt. Just a bit, not too much.
So a little bit of salt, like you just did a dash.
Yeah, basically. I would say like no more than a teaspoon. Teaspoon's quite a lot, but it's going to, we're not putting any additional salt into our jar.
Mm-hmm.
So that is, up to a teaspoon and no more than a teaspoon.
Okay.
I haven't gotten my pickling liquid going yet, but see how much this fills the jar and whether we need more mushrooms. I'm perfectly fine with adding more mushrooms.
That's true. I guess you could always just do more mushrooms if there weren't enough. So it's only a minute to saute them.
I wasn't sure whether or not I wanted, a 500 milliliter jar of mushrooms or 1 liter, or this is a 750. I decided to just compromise in the middle.
Mhm.
But because I already have two 1 liter jars, well, one of them is basically finished now, but I already did it. So I don't know how much I can continue eating these per se, but so I didn't want to do another liter. But
You said that they were fantastic.
they are fantastic, but my wife doesn't eat them, so it's
Oh,
basically me who
They're good for
them
long.
over and over and over again. So we got our quarter of a cup of olive oil. We're gonna add more mushrooms to this. I think we can. It's only half of the jar. But before I do that, I'm just gonna get my marinade going. So we got our apple cider vinegar here. You can use basically we're looking for a vinegar that isn't too dry, I suppose is what we're looking for.
Mhm.
So I would kind of avoid the white wine vinegar.
Yeah.
My last recipe that I did last time actually had some apple cider vinegar, some white wine vinegar, and a little bit of rice vinegar as well, because I just seemingly ran out of all my vinegar. So I had to do a little bit of everything in order to get my 2 cups. But ideally for me, apple cider vinegar, 2 cups of it. But you can use rice wine vinegar. And you could also use like white balsamic vinegar. It's going to add significantly more of a sweetness to it and a depth of sweetness. But it's a little more costly, and I wouldn't do regular, balsamic vinegar because the coloration is, everything's going to be black basically in there, and you're not really going to see your mushrooms.
Mhm.
And it's just a little odd in my mind. So white balsamic vinegar or apple cider vinegar or even rice vinegar, but my go-to would be apple cider. Next, we got a cup of extra virgin olive oil. The important thing here, basically, in my mind, when you're using these mushrooms later, you're often going to be using them, let's say on bread or on salads, etc. And the liquid is going to come with those mushrooms. So you really want to make sure that the liquid really tastes good. And it's something that you wouldn't mind mopping up with bread, basically. So you might not want to use, a cheap oil here, even a cheap olive oil here. You might want to go and find something that, though it seems kind of like a waste to use, expensive as a pickling, it's not really a waste because you can always consume that afterwards with some bread. So this is some pretty decent olive oil here that I picked up. I think it's like $20 for this bottle, and I'm using half of it for this recipe. So that's $10 in olive oil right there. So 1 cup of oil, 2 cups vinegar, 1/4 cup sugar. There we go. That's probably even more. Sorry?
You ever tried using honey for the sugar?
No, but why not? I don't see any reason why you couldn't. Got the heat there. All right, so as that's going, I'm gonna put this back on, get a little bit more oil going in there. Okay. I use quite a bit of oil in my for this, only because mushrooms absorb a lot of oil, and cast iron pans require more oil than a regular non-stick pan. So there's a decent amount of oil every time I do one of these. There's probably a couple of tablespoons, maybe even right now there's probably about 2 tablespoons in there. I think the last one there was probably about 3, give or take. But if you're using a non-stick pan, I think probably 1, 1.5, 2 even is sufficient. Again, mushrooms do absorb quite a bit. So. While I wait for these 2 to go, I'm going to add some of my spicing. So this is all to your heart's content. You don't have to add any spices if you don't want. You're going to get some amazing flavors from this and from the mushrooms. That's all you really need. But I like to spice things up. Excuse the pun. So I'm going to add some red chili flakes. So this is probably half a teaspoon that I'm putting in there. Just gonna give it a lively kick. Add some garlic, just 1 clove. So I'm basically just going to break this apart like that. And that'll be sufficient. Done. And I got some tarragon here. Tarragon's not super common. I don't know if you use tarragon ever.
Yeah, I have. I've
Yeah.
grown it too.
Fantastic. Yeah, I feel like in the North American repertoire, tarragon is basically one of the last herbs.
Mhm.
It's predominantly used in French cooking and not many other cuisines. So, and I find that the idea of French cooking also intimidates people. So maybe that's why tarragon is not super common. But there we go. I love tarragon. I like the slight anise, like earthy. I was thinking of adding some thyme in there. But then I figured, you know what, I'm just going to do a little bit more tarragon and that should be so. In there, got some garlic, I got my tarragon, and I got the red pepper flakes with the mushrooms. Pan is warm. A little warmer. That's going well as well. Break up some of these mushrooms. You can see just how easy it is to just peel them off.
Mhm.
I want to use the older ones there. So I mean, if you have something like this, this is like 3 different smaller mushrooms. They're all kind of stuck together. I would prefer to keep them like this, simply because there's less chance of them burning and whatnot, and then they can act as like one large mushroom as opposed to a few smaller ones that are probably going to disintegrate a little bit under the heat. Add in this, I think. And so this little handful here, I think I'm going to save for dinner tonight. And then these, I want to add in.
I hope your wife likes mushrooms, though.
Nope, she doesn't.
Oh, does she like any mushrooms?
No, she's not a fan of mushrooms.
Oh,
Doesn't like their
that's-
texture, like most people, like a lot of people.
You haven't worked on her.
Well, I think all of my efforts in the cooking mushrooms has only made her less and less interested, honestly. The smell throws her off, she thinks. I forgot to mention, I'm also going to add some pepper here. I love pepper. Pepper is, to me, like the most underrated spice there is.
Mhm.
So I don't want to actually add pepper powder to it. I'm just going to add the peppercorn straight into the jar.
Okay.
The mushrooms, so that's bubbling up, so that's ready to go. Mushrooms are almost ready to go. Usually I'll put my spices either at the very bottom of it or halfway through, like this time. Simply because when you add the liquid, those little things tend to want to float up. And we kind of want to keep them submerged as much as we can. So as a result, I put them either at the bottom or halfway through, just so that everything kind of, all the mushrooms trap them in. Feel like if you put them at the bottom, then you don't get the visual effect when you look at the jars as much, but it probably doesn't matter to most people. You can see even the 2 tablespoons have completely dried up. I have no oil in this pan anymore. Basically just mushrooms kind of burn into the bottom of a cast iron pan at this point. But again, basically all we're looking for is the heat. Oh. So as soon as this comes to a boil, it's ready to go. There's no reason to leave it boiling or anything of that sort. Didn't turn on. So this looks like it's probably ready. How's this piece look? That's steam coming out, right? All right. Happy with that. Toss this pan to the back. All right. So here I'm gonna add my mushrooms straight into this pan. Or have a jar. Rather. You can do this with any mushroom,
Mhm.
wild or cultivated. It's just a great all-around recipe for
Mhm.
kind of mushrooms. I like to try to kind of compress them a little bit, simply because it allows for the liquid to have kind of less space in there. Give it a bit of a compression. So that's how it looks right now.
Okay.
So it's pretty well full. And then my liquid's gonna go in. I'm gonna use a ladle for this, I think. I don't think I'm gonna be needing all of this, to be honest. Perfectly fine. It's So basically, this boiling liquid is really what's going to finish the cooking of those mushrooms. The beginning was just a light sear, open it up. And this is going to basically wrap up the rest of it. There we go. So it's all in there now. What's going to end up happening, I'm sure I can show this on the, so what we'll do is we'll transition over here. I don't know if you see that, but
Mhm.
what ends up happening is some of the oil just starts separating off, and that makes sense. That just kind of is what happens. But basically, you're going to get a layer where the oil just kind of rises.
So do you ever pressure can those after to keep them for longer, or?
You can. I've never seen a need to do that because they'll, basically, if you're planning on storing them on a shelf for long term, then you'd be canning them. I just leave, I only ever do a jar or two at a time.
Mhm.
And when I do that, they just kind of go into the fridge, right? So there's no need to can them. In that case, you can just leave them in the fridge and they'll last in the fridge for, over a year. Basically, everything is
Mhm.
submerged. That's kind of
Yeah.
So, but you could can them. The only thing is that I'm not 100% sure on. So when you can food, it needs to have the appropriate level of acidity in
Mhm.
there,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if this has the correct amount of acidity, so that would have to be confirmed before canning for long-term storage,
Yeah.
dry storage. But otherwise, there wouldn't be an issue with that. So, and the other thing is that mushrooms have a particularly strange effect on acidity as well, I believe so. Anyways. So a calculator would need to be had in order to figure out
Mhm.
if that acidity level is correct. I mean, it has, basically 2/3 of the liquid is vinegar. So it
Mhm.
theoretically should have sufficient. I mean, if you can can a stew, then you should be able to can this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
but yeah, just kind of a little disclaimer on that one. Otherwise, so this is basically going to be put in the fridge. It can be consumed after about 2 hours. I mean, it can be consumed right away if you wanted to, but we give it kind of 2 hours to allow it to absorb some of that liquid. And then after that, you're basically good to go, and it'll last up to a year. You can use it on, like I said, you can chop it up, you can mince it up and add it to a nice soup kind of thing. I've would probably do it with like a cream of soup, you know, whether it be carrot soup or butternut squash soup or anything like that. You know, dice this up on the cutting board and use it as a garnish, and you'll just add a nice acidic punch to it. You could add it, you know, pull them apart, add them into salads, and it'll just again give you a nice acidic hit when you get one of those in your mouth. Or you can just use it on bread, just like that, or on Triscuits and cheese kind of thing. It's very versatile, just a condiment basically at this point, so you can use it on basically anything. And when you finish the actual mushrooms in the jar, the liquid is still super delicious. So it could theoretically be reused for the next one. It's just oil and vinegar. Or you can just use it as, again, a dressing for a salad or what have you. So nothing in that jar needs to go to waste. It's worth pointing out that the garlic in there is probably going to oxidize. So it's going to turn blue/green on you. That is not, that's just natural. There's nothing wrong with that. So when that inevitably happens, don't worry about it.
Okay.
Well, that's it. See that in my pot here, I probably used about 2/3 of the liquid. And I probably could have used a little less if I wanted to in here, simply because I know the liquid is higher than the actual ingredients. Basically, you're just looking to submerge the ingredients. There are some items that you could find at the store that you can put inside jars to keep them submerged. They're like they look like little plastic strainers essentially, and you put them inside and it keeps them submerged. Since again, I keep them always in the fridge and I eat them pretty quickly, I don't really care too much about that. What I just do is I usually, when I go in, I won't eat the top mushroom. I'll kind of mix it back to the bottom, and then I'll consume one of the mushrooms that are from the bottom. Just kind of always have the ones at the bottom. But
Well, great.
that's basically it.
Thanks for showing me the recipe. I'll see if I get enough mushrooms on this flesh to try it, or else I'll get some of Jonah's and try that. So I have another question from yesterday. What was it? The pipalini? What was the mushroom that he said was very good? Peppa. Jonah was bugging us because we weren't able to say it properly. But do you sell the mycelium for that?
I do not know. No. I could probably get it. It's just not one that people ever ask for. So
because they don't. Is it like what's yours? Have you grown it?
I have not grown it now.
Have you tasted it?
As any of the other ones, really. It's just sorry.
Have you tasted them?
Yeah.
And do you find? Are you a big fan of them or not? It's not. It's preference.
Yeah, I mean, you know. John loves them. Right?
Yeah, but if he's the only one, then, and I guess a few people, then, I guess then is he oversold them?
Well, this is the thing. I think, you know, John says that they're basically the most flavorful of the mushrooms. Perhaps, but compared to wild mushrooms, they don't stand up, right? And I predominantly eat wild mushrooms, so
yeah.
You know, as a result, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. I think all cultivated mushrooms are generally great, but don't, you know, are separate and apart from, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like a winter strawberry versus a summer strawberry. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay.
So cultivated mushrooms are fantastic, but they don't pack a punch that wild mushrooms will give you.
Yeah.
So as a result, you know, when you know, for a lot of these mushrooms, like those ones, pepperinos and chestnuts and whatnot, because they take so long to grow, they tend to be more expensive, right? And I'm not willing to spend the money on them simply because
you can get the one. Yeah.
I get better elsewhere. Right?
Yeah.
Just
And you can
seasonal, unfortunately.
So and I mean, I guess too, you can get a lot of dried mushrooms that, like, do you eat when it's like, well, you grow your own mushrooms, but do you, like, it's so easy sometimes to buy that big thing of wild mushrooms, and I don't know where they've been maybe produced in, but I think we bought a big container from Costco one time, and I guess it's a mix of various mushrooms. But anyway, do you dry your mushrooms that you aren't consuming? And
yeah, I dry a lot of mushrooms.
Yeah.
We have an entire shelf in my pantry dedicated to dried mushrooms.
Okay, and you're just drying them in a, like just air dry or dehydrating them, or
I
what's
use
the?
a dehydrator. I find that, so the classic way of doing it is to put it onto like a window screen. Right?
Yeah.
Put it onto a screen and put it in the sun, but then it's very dependent on the sun. And the thing is that, you know, while we might get quite a bit of sun, I find that usually the best climate for wild mushrooms to be grown are basically the rainy days, right? And you want to dry mushrooms basically as soon as possible. So, you know, oftentimes we're not blessed with having, you know, a rainy day immediately followed by a sunny day thing, right? So, you know, you find your mushrooms, but it's cloudy, or, you know, it's not hot and sunny, right? So, as a result, I just don't find it to be an effective or a
Mhm.
particularly useful method of doing it. But if you do have a sunny day and you have a screen just lying around, then you can definitely use it. Clean the screen first. Some people don't do that, and I find it really kind of gross. There's a lot of pollen that goes through, you know, they'll pull literally the screen out of their window and then they'll use it. There's a lot of stuff on there. So, and then, you know, you can do it in the oven at like the lowest temperature, but it's just so energy inefficient. So what I always recommend, you know, I think a dehydrator or 4-shelf dehydrator, which is what I
Yeah.
use.
Yeah, we've
Other
got
people
it.
I know use a 12-shelf and whatnot, but for me, just for my mushrooms, I find 4 is sufficient. And I think those are like $60 on Amazon.
Yeah, no, we've got it. We've dehydrated food before. In fact, now we have a freeze dryer, which I've just had it for less than a year, and it's amazing, but it was expensive. And I think Jonah pushed me to it, and it has a high resale value. But we have a huge raspberry patch at the cottage, and I was tired of making jams and stuff. And because I'm traveling from Kenora to Ottawa, I can't bring frozen berries either. So anyway, we dehydrated a bunch, and then the strawberries were amazing. Like if you can pick fresh strawberries in season, I think those are one of the best, but you can dehydrate anything. And so maybe, I don't know if you've tasted freeze-dried mushrooms, but I know that John had some from the chaga, but I don't know. I mean, I prefer actually, given the taste that he gave us a taste of the dehydrated and freeze-dried, I actually prefer the taste of just making the tea with the chaga blocks. Like it's just more mild, whereas what he gave us had a bit of a strong bitter taste. And so I wouldn't run around with freeze dry, because chaga, like I harvested the chaga 2 years ago, and it was a big, like it's funny that no one, it's on the island where we have a cottage, and nobody seems to know what it is. So it's like no one else has touched it. And then I took a piece of it off, but it was quite a large piece. And I cut it up and I dried it, and then it's fine. Like it's not deteriorating. So I don't know why I would freeze dry it or do dry.
I've had chaga now that I've had for 3 years, I think. I haven't really done any process to it. I just took it off and chopped it up and put it into a jar, and that's it.
Yeah.
You know, it's basically wood. So,
Yeah.
you know,
as long as you get the moisture out so it doesn't mold.
Yeah, exactly. And then I do have it's actually funny. I had this little jar here. I went to give a little seminar on mushrooms, and this woman came and handed me this half jar of, I think this is like a 1 ounce jar kind of thing, and it's half full of chaga. And she said, "Here, we're gonna give this to you as a gift." I'm like, "Thanks." Eat it at home, but you know,
I know people buy it, it's quite expensive, and you know, whether it's a lot of marketing to get the cost up, but I don't know. I mean, I know you did in a while, but
I have this is free dried lion's mane.
oh, and how would you use that?
Honestly, I use it, you know, it's freeze dried. So some people will be like, "Oh, you can make drinks out of it," and so like that. Again, I like to use it in ways that just incorporate into my cooking. It just adds mushroomy flavor and the medicinal components to it.
Okay.
So, you know, when I'm making eggs, for example, I'll use it on my eggs.
Okay.
Just like a simple fried egg kind of thing, and I'll just, you know, crush a little bit on there. I've used it on popcorn, and that was really good.
Mm.
Uh,
Okay, so it's worth trying some, experiment a bit with the freeze dryer then.
yeah, exactly. I mean,
Mhm.
as a former chef, I like to experiment with things anyway. So
Yeah, yeah.
I just throw it into everything and hope for the best. If it doesn't taste good, then usually I know what might go with things. So
Yeah, yeah.
experimenting is a little bit more of a educated guess than it is
Mhm,
just
mhm. Okay,
willy-nilly.
okay. Well, this is great. Well, and I may come on the 7th. We'll see. I usually head out west, but they had about 20 centimeters of snow 2 days ago. So and we're on an island, so I have to wait till the ice goes out, and I don't think the ice will be out by then. I mean, it can go pretty quick, but anyway. So you're essentially, I mean, it's clean up the trail, but you're also foraging. Foraging, but not taking. Like what you said to me, Marbleu is you're doing a cleanup.
Yeah. Yeah.
But whatever you see, I mean, you may see some stuff, right? That
Yeah, I mean, we'll see if we see anything. It's pretty early in the season still, so
yeah.
um,
Well, I usually do a lot of cleanups around here, so I'm not foreign to cleanups. I'm out with the dogs every day. I was just this morning and cleaning up, and everyone says to me, "Oh, thank you." I'm like saying, "Well, you can pitch in too." I mean, it's bizarre. People in their heads, it's like, I'm not the cleanup person.
I know, I get that.
But I haven't been to Marbleau for a long time, and it's a really nice area. So
Yeah,
and,
absolutely. The area that we're going on is not like the bog area, right?
yeah,
It's
not the boardwalk. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. We're not at the boardwalk. We're a little ways away. But basically it's really nice walk area.
Is it a dog friendly trail if you have a dog on leash or no? Because some of them are not. You don't.
Yeah, so there were sections of it that are
not.
dog friendly, and
Yeah.
there are sections that aren't.
Okay. So
For
dogs.
example, like a cedar woodland area that's like all cedars, and supposedly your dog's not allowed there. But then like on the main trail through the rest of the forest, it's dog friendly. So
So
not
if I come, no dogs, essentially.
I mean, you risk $100 fine. Let's put it that way.
Okay. If bylaws out there in force, anyway.
Yeah, it's very rare that you actually see anyone out there enforcing it.
Yeah, it's just that I also want to respect some of the good rules, but anyway, if it's a good rule, we'll see.
Yeah, and it's I always have this debate with people because I have a dog and I bring my dog out a lot, and signs like that kind of annoy me in a way because I'll go to an area and they'll say, like specifically that area. The reason why I chose that area is because there tends to be quite a bit of garbage just lying around off the trail. And to me, it's just like, but then there's signs that say, no dogs conservation area. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like there's bags of old chips, there's Tim Hortons cups, there's everything. And you're telling me that this is a conservation area and that we're not allowed to bring it. What damage is a dog doing that humans aren't doing right now?
Yeah.
So I guess if there's, if humans are damaging it, you don't want to just add more damage to the other animals. But
it's true that the dogs, like, I find that it's rare that a dog's going to rip up an area. I mean, they're not going to just go dig up an area if they're on a walk. Like they're more interested in.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I can understand the fauna where they don't want to have any maybe some endangered or threatened species bothered, or if it's nesting but anyway.
But that's the other thing, right? I mean, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of, there can be coyotes over there, right? And a coyote is really no different than a dog being in that area. So
yeah,
if you're concerned by anything like that, I mean, I feel like more of it is possible risk of, a dog and a coyote meeting each other in the woods.
Yeah.
They don't care about that. That's not what they're saying is the concern, right? They're saying it's, I guess, your dog chasing a squirrel, but I don't really see how that is particularly damaging to the environment either.
Okay.
Anyways,
all right. So maybe we'll see you on the 7th, but thank you very much. This has been great. And it's a long haul when you start. I didn't realize that when I signed up that it would be like, I thought, oh, maybe this 2-week course, and I had no idea. So I certainly appreciate the whole process. And I've got, I think I'll continue on. I think Jonah has a strong interest, but I guess now I'm interested actually, if I can put some of the spent substrate at the cottage, and I just have to get some hardwood chips, because we have birch, but it's a lot of poplar and pine and spruce that we have there. But anyway, we have a lot of shady areas. It's just that I just need to probably make an area and dump some. Maybe I put pellets, or I get some. It's kind of odd to take. I mean, we have rotting birch, so I guess I could kind of put it where the rotting birch is.
Yeah, it's not the favorite. A lot of those.
So birch is not a. Yeah.
Those tend to be a lot of the mycorrhizal trees. So on one hand, it's great.
Yeah, well, birch are great for boletes. That's right. Maybe I don't want to keep my boletes.
Usually for these hardwoods, our hardwood, for example, that we're using for these substrates is maple.
Yeah.
I mean, oysters will grow on anything. So
you think they'll grow on spruce and pine?
I mean, you can grow oysters on cigarette butts.
Yeah. Okay.
Plastic, or
Yeah, crazy.
So yeah, I think they'll grow.
Have you tried it? Have you tried an area that you've tried to enhance so that you get some cultivated mushrooms growing?
No, not really. At my cottage, I kind of just put them down in a specific area near an oak tree that I know. But it's not so much with an expectation of it growing. It's kind of, sometimes I do and sometimes it does, but the idea is kind of just to have those spores kind of in the area. And then might not be the tree that I'm planting next to, but maybe some other tree in the forest nearby, because they basically forage all around it. So those spores go up in the air, and hopefully they'll grab onto a tree nearby, and then I'll spot it in a year or two when they're.
So you're seeing some of your mushrooms out there, and
well, that's the thing. I don't even know if they're mine, right? It could just be serendipitous that they're growing it, but yeah. So once the substrate's done, it's basically done. I know some people, when we had the derecho last year, I know some people who went to John's, they grabbed a whole bunch of his spent blocks. They went back to I think it was Pinney Forest, and they had a massive city had created this massive hill of wood chips, basically from the dead trees there, and they just buried the blocks inside of the wood chips. So hoping that the entire pile would become I guess a mushroom thing. Anyways, I don't know what happened there, but people will try different things to get, but the mushrooms will do what they want to do.
Yeah, it's amazing. Okay, well, I'll let you go and carry on with your Sunday. Nice. At least we're getting the moisture.
Yeah, I mean, this is great for those morels. So
yeah.
For us.
So when do we? So I'm gonna keep an eye on my little patch if I'm still here, but I can't remember when I've only seen them once, and they, I got to think about 12 or 14 in the area, but I guess what's the earliest you'd see them?
So basically, when the trilliums come up.
Okay.
That's basically when the morels come up.
Okay. Okay, that's good to know.
So that's kind of your marker there.
Okay, sounds good. All righty. All right. Well, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. It was a great course, and we'll hopefully see you in early May.
But you say you can't come to the one next weekend?
What's next weekend?
We're doing another harvest, stage 4.
Oh, okay.
A tempura recipe.
Oh, okay. Well, sure I can. I just didn't see. I'm not so great in keeping up with all my emails and stuff, and I tend to not be on, and so if I don't get kind of like poked, I don't necessarily see it. But Sure, I'll try and jump on, and is it 9 o'clock on Sunday?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, I'll try and jump on. All right.
Could be 10 a.m. I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll look for it, and then I'll let you know. I'll RSVP, so you don't end up getting all ready, and then if people aren't there, then
It's the last session, so I'm hoping that
Yeah.
someone can be there.
Yeah. Did other people sign up for this and they didn't come? Is that what happened?
There were a couple of people, but I knew that they may or may not be joining us.
Okay.
So not too concerned by it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, sounds good. Well, I'll let you know, and if not, then I'll look for the May 7th, and that would be great.
All right. Sounds
All
good.
right. Thanks a lot.
All right.
Okay,
Have a good
take care.
Sunday.
Yeah.
Bye.